All right. If you're already online, please do say hello in the chat. We'd love to know who is in the room. Fantastic. All right. It's great. We get started now. So hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, Fermented Futures, exploring the untapped potential of fermented foods for sustainable food systems. It's great to see so many of you joining today. I think we're expecting around 300 participants, and I see everyone saying hello, which is really nice. So my name is Kessel Gabriel Verschutzen. I'm the scientific director at Site and Life, and it's my great pleasure to be moderating today's webinar, organized by Site and Life together with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. Housekeeping rules, please. So please keep your audio and your video off throughout the webinar so that we can all hear each other. Use the chat to say hello the way that you're doing. We'd love to hear who you are, where you're from, just to get a feel of who is in the room, especially given that we're on Zoom. For questions to speakers, I'm going to ask you to please use the Q&A box and not the general chat. And this is because we'll be monitoring only the Q&A box for discussion questions. And this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the Site and Life website and social media channels after the event. So before jumping into the agenda, I would like to briefly set the scene on fermentation and give a bit of a sense of why we are doing this webinar in the first place. So first of all, what is fermentation and what are fermented foods? So fermentation is a process in which microorganisms and their enzymes transform raw food matrices. And fermented foods are foods or beverages made through desired microbial growth and enzymatic conversion of food components. And fermentation is actually one of the earliest food processing and preservation techniques that we have. And these processes, they now sit right at the intersection of a concern that we hear everywhere, which is resilience in food systems. And we know it all too well that with overlapping crises, climate shocks, conflict, economic instability, we need solutions that are locally rooted and that are affordable and that are resilient. And what we have seen through this exploratory work is that traditional fermentation quietly ticks many of those boxes, just as this infographic shows. So just to name a few, so fermentation builds on local raw ingredients and it scales up traditional processing techniques instead of replacing them. Number two, it reduces post-harvest losses. It can extend shelf life, which is critical where cold chains are limited. And it can also improve food safety by suppressing harmful pathogens and producing natural preservatives. And at the same time, it can enhance the nutritional content of diets. So for example, by improving the bioavailability of minerals like iron, like zinc, it also enhances protein digestibility. And in some cases, it can also remove allergens, so reducing anti-nutrients and toxins. And it can do all of this, all while deepening the flavor, the texture, and using low energy, locally sourced processes that can even create income opportunities for small processors, especially women and youth. Next slide, please. And the thing is, of course, this is deeply cultural. In many countries across the globe, fermented foods are everyday staples, and any world map of fermented foods is only a glimpse of what exists. And there is still so much to uncover about these foods, from their characterization all the way to their full potential. Next slide, please. And one thing that we would like to underline in this webinar is that they are not niche healthy foods. They're not just for a small group of people. They are everyday staples that feed families, school children, workers, and they are already deeply embedded in local cultures. And again, at the same time, behind each of them is a very active and microbial world. We have complex communities of bacteria, yeast, and they can all influence the safety, the shelf life, the taste, the texture, and the nutritional quality. And so as we go through this webinar today, I'd like to invite all of us to keep one question in mind, which is, given how important fermented foods already are in many places, how could we start to reflect them more deliberately in our policies, in our programs, and in our investments? It's great to see so many of you. I see so many continents now in the chat, so please keep introducing yourselves. So what are we trying to achieve in the next 80 minutes of this webinar. So first of all, we are going to touch on the science of fermentation, how it relates to nutrition, food safety, and health. Of course, we won't be able to deep dive into everything, but we'll give a sense of the key mechanisms and questions in that regard. Second, we want to showcase real world examples with a strong focus on low and middle income countries. And third, we really hope that this is going to spark collaboration and discussion. So to drive innovation, attract investment, and to support policy development around fermentation. So in terms of the agenda, we will start with a science segment from science to solution. And then we will move more to a segment called Living Traditions, where we will focus on Mabisi in Zambia and Gari in Ghana. And then we will look at the regulatory pathways and the food-based dietary guidelines for fermented foods. And we will close with a panel session and audience Q&A. And so after each segment, there will be a short Q&A. So please keep the Q&A box busy and indicate which speaker your question is for whenever possible. And so with that, I will now move into the first segment where we will zoom in on the science. So we will first hear from Professor Kristin Verbeeke on the role of fermented foods in gut health, followed by Dr. Giacomo Mantegazza on how B vitamin producing microbes can enrich foods. And then we will turn to hear from Dr. Teresa Tudun, who will discuss how starter cultures can make fermentation safer. And just to say that in the picture, it is not Teresa. The professor Afulaki had an emergency, so we're really grateful for Teresa to be stepping in. So each speaker will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll open up for a short Q&A. So over to you, Kristin.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. And so indeed, health is not only shaped by human biology, it's also influenced by our gut microbiota, which is a dynamic community of microbes that shape how we live and how we thrive. So next slide, please. We have a symbiotic relationship with our microorganisms, which means that we need each other and that living together provides benefits for both parties. So we offer ample of undigested substrates to our bacteria, an environment with low concentrations of oxygen and a nicely warm temperature. And in return, our bacteria help to digest our food and train our immune system. Now, some of the food that we eat remains undigested in our small intestine, which is mainly dietary fiber and also some protein. And it ends up in the large intestine where it serves as nutrients for our microorganisms. And from those nutrients, our microbiota produce a wide variety of metabolites, which are small molecules that are absorbed and affect the metabolism and the health of the colonic cells, but that also reach the systemic circulation and distant organs such as the liver, the adipose tissue, and the brain. So importantly, some of these metabolites have positive effects, but others might also have rather negative effects. A second way how the microbes influence our health is by interacting with our immune system. Next slide, please. So there is only one layer of cells that separate the colonic lumen, which is the outside world and which is where the bacteria are, from our inside world. And the immune cells that are located below this epithelial layer get information about the microbiota and the antigens in the colonic lumen via specialized M cells or via direct sampling from the lumen. And those immune cells continuously have to discriminate between invasive organisms to which they respond with an immune reaction and commensal organisms that they can tolerate. And so changes in microbiota composition may alter the interaction with our immune system. Now, next slide, please. Analyzing the records of about 46,000 American people showed that intake of live microbes is associated with modest health benefits on blood pressure, inflammation, glucose and lipid metabolism, and body weight management. And they also found that the results were similar when overall microbiome intake was used or whether fermented foods intake was used, suggesting that consumption of fermented foods may have health benefits. However, it is important to realize that such analysis does not involve causality and that further research is required to establish a causal relationship. Now, how can fermented foods affect our health? So first, next slide, please. By consuming fermented foods, we deliver microorganisms to our gastrointestinal tract, live microorganisms or not. And it's mainly consumption of fresh foods, fruits and vegetables, and milk and dairy products that are the main sources of bacteria, whereas processed and heat-treated foods hardly contain any bacteria. And actually, 90% of ingested bacteria originates from fermented foods. Next, and then also next slide. Secondly, food fermentation alters the food matrix. As already mentioned, for example, dietary fiber and protein may be partially degraded by the fermentation. Polyphenols, but also minerals, can become more bioavailable, and specific lactic acid bacteria can provide exopolysaccharides. These are only a few examples of how fermentation modifies the supply of substrates to the microbiota, hence the production of metabolites, and hence also our health. So to conclude, I think it's important to realize that our gut microbiota constitute an essential part of our body that affects our health via two major mechanisms, including the production of metabolites and the interaction with our immune system, and that consumption of fermented foods may alter these mechanisms by introducing bacteria and by modifying the supply of substrates to the bacteria. So thank you very much. And with that, I pass the microphone to Giacomo Montecazio.
Thank you, Christine, and good afternoon, everybody. Next slide, please. Widespread micronutrient inadequacies, specifically in riboflavin, folate, and cobalamin, persist as a significant public health challenges, specifically in low-income countries. While chemical fortification remains the standard intervention, its efficacy is frequently constrained by supply chain logistics and economic accessibility. But fermentation might be a valuable alternative. By leveraging biosynthetic pathways for functional strain, it is possible to enhance the nutritional density of staple food in situ. This presents a sustainable mechanism to complement existing nutritional strategies rather than relying on external additives. Next slide, please. The first key application is vitamin B2 within cereal matrices. Physiologically, B2 is critical as the precursor of FMN and FAD, two coenzymes that drive the Krebs cycles and cellular redox reduction. Currently, strategies utilize selection of lactic acid bacteria as cell factories to overproduce riboflavin directly within the food matrices. This process has been shown to significantly enhance the dietary level of cereal-based formulation. Specifically, application using Limosil-Lactobacillus fermentum has successfully produced riboflavin-enhanced bread, demonstrating the potential to transform lower staples into vectors for nutrition. Next, please. Vitamin B9 or folate in the context of lactic acid fermentation. Folate functions as a crucial coenzyme for one-carbon transfer and DNA synthesis. Specifically, lab strains, particularly from Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium genera, are capable to produce significant amount of vitamin B9 during food fermentation. However, human intervention studies reveal a critical variable, the food matrix. As demonstrated Camembert cheese studies, folate bioavailability can range drastically from less than 2% to over 60%, depending on the specific fermentation process. And that's because fermentation alters the natural occurring Vitamers profile. So that Vitamers dictates both the chemical stability and the biological availability of the vitamins in the final product. Next, please. The third target is vitamin B12 or cobalamin. Unlike other vitamins, B12 is exclusively of microbial origin and can't be found in plant products. In food fermentation, the primary producer is Propionibacterium frederici. While it's traditionally associated with Swiss-type cheese like Emmentaler, current research is aiming to apply this fermentation in cereal and legume matrices, offer a critical in situ strategies for plant-based diets, which naturally lack the B12 source. A major scientific challenge lies in distinguish active B12 from pseudocobalamin, an inactive form that is often produced by lactic acid bacteria. Ensuring that fermentation yields the bioavailable form is crucial for nutritional efficacy. And to conclude, This approach redefines sustainable nutrition for low-income areas. It is not about importing expensive solution. It is about optimizing local resources. By bioenhancing plant-based staples, we address critical nutrition gaps with a low environmental footprint. And crucially, this offers a functional probiotic bonus, supporting gut health in communities where healthcare may be limited. The path forward lies on decentralization. We must transfer the capacity to produce this functional culture directly to local communities. This empowered to secure their own nutrition independent of fragile industrial supply chains. And thank you for your attention. And I will now leave the floor to Dr. Teresa.
Thank you, Jack. So good day, everyone. Today, I'll be discussing how development of starter cultures can transform traditional fermentation into a more controlled, safer, and nutritionally enhanced process. Next slide, please. Fermentation is one of the oldest biotechnology processes used by humans. In Africa, it is essential for staple foods like iru, ogi, dari, amongst others. However, many traditional fermentation are spontaneous, relying on naturally occurring microbes, which can cause variability in their safety, in their taste, and even their nutritional quality. Spontaneous fermentation is usually dependent on autochthonous microbes, which is usually the main method for producing fermented food and beverages throughout history, and it remains a mainstay method in domestic, small-scale, and household settings. It involves the natural inoculation of microorganisms from raw materials from the equipment or from the environment. And in this type of fermentation, the conditions are adjusted to allow for the growth of desirable fermentation microbes that impart unique sensory properties to the product and prevent the growth of spoilage-associated microbes. The main challenges of this type of fermentation usually have to do with the quality of the fermented product, which is difficult to predict and control, and consequently can lead to production of fermented foods with inconsistent flavor, aroma, and other characteristics. Thus, there is need for a more controlled fermentation process using starter culture. Next slide, please. Starter cultures are specific strains introduced deliberately to control fermentation. They ensure consistent product quality. They enhance safety by outcompeting spoilage or even pathogenic microbes, and can be tailored to produce desirable nutrients or bioactive compounds. They have so many benefits like the safety and quality consideration. They can also be used in flavor and aroma development. They enhance nutrients. They enhance stability of the microbes and even consistency of the product. And beyond safety, they also reduce anti-nutrients. They are used in biofortification as mentioned by Jack, and they improve digestibility. Next slide. The process for culture development usually begins with isolation of promising strains from successful traditional fermentation. And next, we test for functional traits like enzyme production, vitamin production, acidification rates, and after that, safety evaluation is carried out and fermentation optimization, and then to test for stability of the microorganism to produce the desired functional metabolites. Now, there are also advancements in starter culture development because despite their importance in improving food quality, the development of effective culture poses several challenges, and one of the major challenges is the need to identify and characterize microbials with desirable fermentation traits, such as rapid growth, acid tolerance, and production of desired metabolites. And that is where the advancement in starter culture comes in, where the high throughput and the bioinformatics are used in enhancing efficiency, sustainability, and diversity of fermented food production, paving way for a new innovation. Next slide, please. Here is an example of our research where we use bacillus culture for production of fermented African locust beans. And we have the process here where the was added to the washed raw African locust beans, and then the improved locust beans is which has riboflavin fortified in it. Next slide. And here is the outcome. The graph is showing the type which increased the vitamin riboflavin from 0.04 milligram per gram to 0.34 milligram per gram. Next slide. So in conclusion, with the increased pressure to produce more food with increased nutrition without the risk of foodborne infections and control of fermentation process, the use of a selection of microbial traits as a starter culture can contribute to predictable and reproducible improvement of safety, nutritional, organoleptic, and functional quality of fermented food, paving way for a more sustainable and resilient food system. Thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christine, Giacomo, and Teresa, for these clear scientific snapshots of fermentation's potential. And I am delighted because actually in the last minute, we got quite a few questions. In fact, I see that Christine, you're already typing your answer, but perhaps you can answer live one of the first questions that we got here, which is, do fermented foods lower the inflammation in the body? Are they recommended to patients having hemodialysis twice a week? Kristen, is this something that you are able to take on?
Well, I was already typing an answer, and I must say that I am not aware of trials that specifically investigated the impacts of fermented foods in this type of patients. However, what we do know from the study that I mentioned with the association-based type of study, where they saw that regular consumption of live microbes in general and fermented foods more specifically lowered levels of inflammation in the body. Well, it was associated with lower levels. But as I said, this is an association and does not imply a causal relationship. I will need to do more specific studies to really see whether the fermented food intake is really the cause of the lower inflammation.
Thank you so much, Christine. I think this is great. And I mean, just to say to everyone that for some of these questions that are maybe more specific, we will provide a very clear answer in a written format, and we will share that with all participants after the event. I see some very specific questions, but I think we can still probably take one more question, and I would like to address this one perhaps to Giacomo. Someone is asking, I'm wondering if you can share the increase in bioavailability of minerals, vitamins, and the increased digestibility of protein from fermentation processes. Are there any studies showing the impact on iron status in women or children, to your knowledge?
So iron is a little bit out of my topic, so I'm not sure what it's outside as research. But I think I came across a couple of articles talking about increased bioavailability of iron after lactic acid fermentation. I think I saw them a couple of months ago. About bioavailability of minerals, vitamins, that actually really depends on the fermented products. So and the kind of fermentation and the bacteria that are inside and that can ferment, because some bacteria or some strains, specific strains from bacteria can actually increase a lot, like over 60-70% the bioavailability of vitamins and minerals. And some other strains from the same species can actually, they're not as good as to produce bioavailable form of vitamins. So there are articles and there is research about bioavailability of minerals, vitamins, and the digestibility of proteins, but that actually really depends on both the starting culture and the biomass that it's being fermented.
Fantastic. Thank you, Giacomo, for this really detailed answer. I see so many questions and very exciting ones that I think we should also address a little bit later in the panel discussion. So please keep them in mind. And also just so you know that to vote for specific questions if there are ones which you would like to be answered during this webinar. So with that, we will move on to our next segment. And we will move from the lab to basically what people eat every day. So this is called Living Traditions. And here we look more at fermentation as it is practiced in households and communities as part of culture. So we have 2 case studies. We're going to have Dr. Bernard Munga, who will speak about Mabisi in Zambia and how this traditional fermented milk has been shaped and refined over time. And then we will also hear from Dr. Abina Boache, who will speak about Gari in Ghana and how fermentation affects taste, texture, safety, and nutrient profile. So over to you, Bernard.
Yeah. Thank you, Kissel. Now welcome. Next. So we all have our fermented type of food. I think Kiso did a good justice on the introduction. So all of these foods derive their origins from traditional recipes. Let me take you on a next slide. So in case you are wondering where Zambia is, it's located in the southern central part of Africa. And let me also introduce you to Mavisi. Next slide. So Mavisi is a traditional fermented milk product made by spontaneous fermentation of raw milk at room temperature. The process starts with raw milk, which is then followed by a sieving process, and then a container is filled. So traditionally, a calabash was used. Nowadays, you can container used, and then there's an incubation a few days, after which you have a stirring step, and voila. Now, during incubation, depending on the process conditions, whey may be generated, which can also be used for various applications, including cooking for children's already. Now, there are several variations to this production, and I'm only showing you one. And these can have an effect on the quality of the product. So, what are the important attributes of Marisi? Slide. So, the consumer rates a highly two important characteristics, several more, but largely you have consistency. And what is mostly preferred is the thick and medium consistency, which you see on the left. So there, the Chroma spread shows you consistency. Then you also have the one that is runny or light in consistency for two reasons. It can be as a result of agitation during processing or a clear case of stenosis or whey separation. So if the degree of whey separation is more than 30%, like is the case with a bottle that is furthest on the right picture, you'll be able to end up with a product that is undesirable like that. So the process conditions are important. Taste is also an important characteristic, and the medium taste is usually the around pH 4. Next slide. What are the uses of Mavisi? It can be consumed with cereal-based products, so that's porridge, rice, sorghum, or products such as pumpkin, tubers, and it also has applications for cooking, cooking products like vegetables, even baking cakes. It has been used as a base in the treatment of undernourishment, children as well as diarrhea. Next slide. So in terms of the potential for the product, which is so versatile, to formalize the trade of this, efforts have been made to develop a code practice which can be applied on other traditional based products. Also, tailor-made products for specific age groups can be explored. In closing, the take-home messages, next slide, is that Mavis is a versatile product which has a rich microbial community profile that can impact health, and it has the potential for the development of tailor-made specific product. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for joining us. So I will share with us the friendship purposes and consumer preferences of another fermented and versatile in use product, which has a huge potential again to be explored for food and nutrition security across the globe, and that is Gari. Most likely. So Gari, can you click again, please? It's a fermented and partially gelatinized granular flour, also referred to as grapes in some literature, and originally from cassava roots. The original use of the cassava is in parentheses because recent innovations have explored using Gari from other root crops. And characteristic of fermented products, the sour taste of Gari and other unique sensory attributes make it versatile such that it's consumed in diverse forms, either as main dishes or side dishes. And the widespread production has coined the term for Gari, and that is Garification, which basically involves 6 main steps, but with some slight differences among processes. Next slide, please. So this gives the Gari production at a glance. Critical in defining the organoleptic processes are the bottom 3 stages. So starting with fermentation, it defines the level of sourness of the final products. Then sieving and roasting, which informs the particle size and other functional properties of the gari product. Of course, it is important to mention that how fresh the cassava roots are at the start of the production process also largely impacts the final coloring of the gari product as well. Next slide. So let's look at the preferred organoleptic properties of gari and how consumers use it. Next, please. Next slide. So largely influenced by fermentation, the gari has a certain, usually ranging between 3.5 to about 4.5 for its pH, and a titratable acidity of up to about 1.2%. It does not have any distinct odors or strong flavors. Off flavors are red flags for consumers to start with, but then the absence of the strong flavors favorably contributes to its versatility in terms of the food application. So if you look at the beautiful dishes on the slide, the top 2 are main meals popular in Ghana, and they are also easily adaptable several consumer bases because all you need to do is add your preferred condiment to the gari. The arrow just shows how the second dish can also serve as a side dish. The sourness of the gari also gives it some uniqueness that is enjoyed largely across West Africa, but especially in Ghana and Nigeria. And that is the dish highlighted blue, which is called sokol, where the consumers just have to add water and sweeten as desired. Last but not least on the slide is a globally popular dish, eba, where the sourness of the gari is also enjoyed by consumers. Next slide, please. So regarding textural attributes, gari is preferred loose and crispy with a fairly uniform and fine granule size. So then again, when using the gari for soakings, that fineness and that crispiness is appreciated. And the far right picture, topmost picture, also is where it can be eaten as snack. The wild fried gari is enjoyed with cowpea sauce, what we call red here in Ghana, also enjoyed across West Africa. And click again, please, for me. Again, the coarseness is also enjoyed in eba with soup. But most importantly, to consumers is that they prefer gari to swell at least 3 times its original size when being used for these dishes. Next slide, please. Yes, and so the color of gari generally is appreciated from being creamy white to about creamy yellow, and it's subject to the preference of individuals. But generally, the creamy white gari is said to be high quality gari, whereas the more yellowish ones is not. But in recent times, due to some innovations, the yellow color is also being appreciated for its perceived nutritional benefits. Next slide, please. So a number of novel innovations have been undertaken to explore the potential of gari towards meeting the food and nutrition security needs of different populations. So as shown on the screen, we have the orange plus sweet potato explored as gari, now from the scratch. Also fortification advances in adding beetroot. Please click adding soya bean and click again. Also having it packaged as ready to use gari. And most importantly, recently a study that my research group also undertook by stabilizing the vitamin A of fortified gari using bran. Again, there have been technological advances where some investigations in China have sought to automate the entire gari production process. Next slide, please. Gives us a fair idea about the versatility of gari. So then, if you can click all, please. If you are a cereal fan, click again, please. It is available for every palate. For the cereal fan, for the one who has tried pounded yam, and then for the critic shares. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, thank you so much, Bernard and Avina. I got very hungry looking at these wonderful pictures, and thank you for bringing these examples to life. So we have about, I think, 2 minutes for the Q&A. And I will start with Bernard. I think there's one question here. What are the major challenges of working with traditional fermented product? Hi, Bernard. I don't think we can hear you just yet. Maybe get closer to the mic.
Hello? Yep.
Yes.
So one of the challenges is quality variation. So until certain producers understand process conditions, sometimes it's a guessing act. So today you produce your product and you have good consistency. The next day you do it, the consistency is different. But what we tried to do and what we've done with Alice was that we also did, when we checked temperatures, we looked at the different conditions, and we're able to see how those actually affect the quality of the product, well, including maybe profiles or the type of method that you actually apply for a specific product. I hope, that's just maybe one example.
This is great, Bernard. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for one more question for Abina. So aside from the acidity and taste improvements in Gari, are there other benefits accrued by the fermentation process, such as improved bioavailability?
Thank you very much for the question. And so that's, as I mentioned, the investigations of the fermentation to see how whether the fortification with vitamin A can be stabilized. So what has been tried is using bran to stabilize the vitamin A, because one of the ways that the fortification has been the vitamin A all with the protein. But there hasn't been extensive studies with how fermentation influences the protein fortification. But then with the vitamin A, we have seen that not the fermentation per se. So rather, instead of adding the fortificants before fermentation, you rather add it after fermentation so that consumers can get the best of it.
Wonderful. Thank you for that detailed answer, Bina. So we will now turn to the policy and the regulatory side. And the question here is simple, but it's an important one. And it's, how do fermented foods show up in guidelines and in regulations, if they show up at all? And what would it take for them to be more clearly recognized and supported? And here we have two speakers in this block. We have Annalena Klapp, who will walk us through how food-based dietary guidelines currently treat fermented foods and what could be improved. And then we also have the pleasure of having Chandana Tekate, who will give an overview of regulatory frameworks, especially where fermented foods don't neatly fit existing categories. So over to you, Annalena.
Yeah, hi everyone. And I will now talk about fermented foods and food-based dietary guidelines. Next slide, please. And I thought I'd start briefly by explaining what dietary guidelines even are. So food-based dietary guidelines, in short, FBDGs, are the government's recommendation for the composition of individuals' diet. Next slide. And here you can see the impact areas of dietary guidelines. So they form the basis for the development of food policies as well as health and nutrition programs. The guidelines are often the basis for recommendation for catering in community institutions such as kindergarten, schools, and hospitals. They give advice to citizens about healthy eating, and they serve as an information source for health professionals, for health and nutrition professionals. So you can see they have a big impact, or they can have a big impact on many different areas. Next slide, please. And as the majority of the countries worldwide have dietary guidelines, there is an also opportunity to use them to create global dietary change. So in fact, 14 countries worldwide have their own dietary guidelines, and here you can see an overview, and it's expected that other countries will follow in the next few years, especially on the African continent. When we take a deeper look, we can see that all large-scale evaluations of FBDGs have shown that governments are lagging behind in integrating health and sustainability goals into national dietary guidelines. And current research that many FBDGs do not fully reflect the latest scientific evidence. Next slide, please. In particular, while recommendations often include a variety of animal-based foods, there is a noticeable gap in guidance on diverse plant-based options, including fermented plant-based foods. And due to the high ecological footprint of animal source foods, there is an urgent need to shift towards more plant-rich diets, while certain cereal-based fermented foods, such as bread, are more frequently integrated. Other plant-based fermented foods, such as kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut, and other fermented vegetables, as well as tempeh, are less common. These foods offer numerous health benefits, and they are also accessible, affordable, and have a low ecological footprint. Next slide. And tempeh is a very nice example. It appears in several dietary guidelines, including Australia, Malaysia, and the US, as part of the protein group. In Australia, it is highlighted alongside tofu and lentils as a nutritious, cost-effective source of protein, iron, healthy fats, and fiber. And in Malaysia, guidelines recommend a daily portion of legumes, including dal, tempeh, and tahu, to meet protein needs as well. Next slide. Let's also take a quick look at novel fermented foods. So advances in fermentation, like fermentation-enabled biomass and precision fermentation, opening up new sustainable protein sources. So at the moment, these products are typically available as meat alternatives in high-income countries. And we know that consumers, especially in the US and Europe, are very interested in these products. And we also see that some dietary guidelines are already recognizing this. So the UK Eat Well Guide mentions microprotein. The Swiss Food Pyramid references it under the brand name Coring. And the Nordic Nutrition Recommendation also lists microprotein as a protein source alongside plant and animal foods. Next slide. And thank you. And the updated report of the Untapped Commission and the Planetary Health Diet, which is the most comprehensive global scientific evaluation of food systems to date, reaffirms and strengthens the core message that a plant-rich diet is key to both human and planetary health. And the Commission analysis reveals a clear global pattern. So most diets still lack enough fruit, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and whole grain. At the same time, many diets still include too much meat, dairy, and sugar. And fermented foods offer a valuable opportunity here to diversify the protein group, because as we are in here today, fermentation can improve protein quality and reduce anti-nutrients in accessible plant-based foods. And meanwhile, novel fermented foods can provide a realistic, sustainable alternative to animal source proteins in the global north, where consumption of meat has risen substantially in recent decades. So FPDGs should feature more fermented foods and highlight how they can support healthy, sustainable diets for everyone. And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Chandana.
Thank you, Annalena. Hello, everyone. I'm Chandana Tekkate from the Good Food Institute's Indian affiliate. It feels great to be on this session. Thank you to the Site and Life team for organizing a full focused webinar on fermented foods. As we've been hearing from previous speakers, there are so many novel methods in which fermented foods are being used. Fermentation is being used. So in my talk, I'm going to give an overview of how fermentation is used to make alternative proteins, or it's also called novel fermented foods. It's also called sustainable foods or smart proteins. And we're going to take a closer look at how they are regulated for food safety globally. Next slide, please. So novel fermented foods are also called precision fermentation and biomass fermentation. Biomass fermentation is where the whole single-cell proteins, whether it's from algae, bacteria, or filamentous fungi, is grown to be consumed as high-protein food products. This is how corn, for example, is made. I'm pretty sure you've heard of that. Annalena also just mentioned it. Just like how traditional fermentation is gaining a global push, these kinds of biomass fermentation, high-protein, single-cell protein, is also getting quite popular. The second is precision fermentation. This is where you use genetically engineered microbes, yeast, fungi, which are programmed to produce a specific ingredient. It might be a dairy protein originating from a microbe, or fat, animal fats from a microbe, or enzymes to be used in end products. These are all much more sustainable compared to traditional animal-sourced foods. So typically, these types of novel fermentation methods use different strains, unique traits, and the methods of production could be quite different from conventional food system. So this is where it requires more food safety scrutiny in the regulatory process. Next slide, please. So market research has been predicting that these types of novel fermented foods is going to become a $100 billion market by 2050. We need to be better prepared for more harmonized food safety approvals. So here I'm showing all the largest food safety approval bodies in the world and how they are looking into the safety of fermented foods. So US FDA uses the most popular GRAS approval pathway, generally regarded as safe. It's a framework used to evaluate food safety, and there are quite a few fermentation, precision and biomass fermentation products already on the market. Singapore always remains to be the most proactive regulator. They have a new guidance that separates precision and biomass fermentation and how they need to be prepared in the form of safety dossiers. The European Regulatory Authority, it is the most stringent regulations in the world. They heavily scrutinize microbial production organisms, their genetics, and so on. They are very thorough in their safety and allergenicity and toxicology perspective. So as of today, no precision fermentation ingredient has been approved in the European region yet. And India, that's where I'm from, we don't have explicit guidance for fermented foods, but companies generally follow the novel foods framework, and there are quite a few products approved and in the market. Next slide, please. So as you've seen, each region is following their own set of guidelines for fermented food safety establishment, but there is a lack of coordination between these international regulatory bodies, and there needs to be more uniform guidelines. So this is where multilateral bodies such as the Codex Alimentarius Commission comes in. Codex is the central part of the FAO and WHO's food safety program, food standards program, and they are working on international harmonization efforts. They've already published a precision fermentation report, which goes into the details of what needs to be looked into closely for regulating the safety of precision fermentation products. They go into so much detail, all the way from microorganism characterization to toxicity, allergenicity, even the purity levels that need to be looked at for fermented food products. I would be happy to talk to you all in one-on-one if needed. If you have any questions, I'm happy to give you more insights into this very complex landscape. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Alina and Chandana, for shedding light on a rather difficult and yet very important topic. I think you made it clear that if we want fermentation to play a bigger role, it has to be visible in the guidelines and it needs to be workable in the regulation, or else it won't be possible to bring these products to scale. So we have only 2 minutes for the Q&A. So I will ask each of you to remain short in your answers. And I will first turn to maybe Annalena. Are there examples of companies who have incorporated fermentation into their operations cost effectively and or potentially who have been able to decrease needs of added premix because of bioavailability of vitamins when it's naturally increased? And Chandana, feel free to touch upon this as well.
Well, that's a good question. So to my knowledge, more and more companies in Europe start also including fortification strategies, especially when it comes to plant-based alternatives. Also, the interest in fermentation is getting bigger and bigger. So far, I think the landscape is still in development. Maybe Chandana, you can give also some more insights on the market development.
Yeah, it is quite a big market already. As I said, today it's nowhere near, but it's projected to go much bigger, maybe 10, 15 times more in the next few years. People are using this technology of fermentation not just to make more nutritious foods, but also from the perspective of, for example, increasing the bioavailability of certain proteins. Maybe some proteins lack certain amino acids, so microbial fermentation is used to enhance that. Sometimes it's used to reduce anti-nutrients for better absorption, including for vitamins. I see a question on ultra processing. It's a very different definition region to region. It's difficult to give a very blanket answer on whether fermented foods are considered ultra processed. It's going to depend on the processing steps involved. Sometimes processing is actually good for the end product because, as I was saying, it increases bioavailability and decreases any anti-nutrients. So it's a very subjective answer and cannot be answered in a wider stance. Please feel free to email these questions to us. We're happy to take it up offline because we're running out of time.
This is great. Thank you so much for everyone actually for staying so engaged with us and for all these questions that are coming in. So we're now going to move into another important part of this webinar, our panel discussion. And so this is where we bring some of the different perspectives together and we react to what we've just heard across science, practice, and policy. And I would like to invite all our panelists to please turn on your cameras so that we can all see you as I introduce you. So first we have Sarah Gibson, a senior manager of nutrition at CIFF, based in the UK. And then we also have Dr. Lynette Neufeld, director of food and nutrition division at the FAO. And we have Dr. Francis Aminu, director of health and nutrition at the Aliko Dangote Foundation in Nigeria. And we have Dr. Christelle Amblot, research director at the Institut de Recherche et Développement in France. So we have a very diverse set of perspectives on this panel, from philanthropy and a UN agency to applied research, a national foundation, working closely with governments and implementers, which is exactly what we need for this conversation. So I would like to remind our audience to keep using the Q&A box and to clearly state which panelist your question is directed to. And I will start with you, Christelle. Christelle, you have extensive experience in microbiology and in nutrition. And I know that you've done some really important work on folate-producing microorganisms in cereal fermentations. Can you share with us what excites you? What excites you the most about the potential of folate-rich fermented foods?
What is really exciting is with this method, it's quite simple, because you just need to give the strains to people and they can use it at home. Instead of just putting water, they put water and a little bit of bacteria inside, and they can just use the traditional process and you can reach everyone. Because when you fortify the food, for example, you have the poorest usually, they will eat their own crops and they will not use the fortified flour. So with fermentation, it's a different target we can have.
This is great. I love that you're saying, that it can be simple. And are there specific examples that you can give from your studies? Any specific foods that you focused on?
Yeah, we focused a lot on injera in Ethiopia. That is a fermented flat bread, kind of pancake, that is eaten daily by almost all the population in Ethiopia. And we did some really interesting work on not only on folate, but also on cobalamin, on vitamin B12. That is really a problem when the people are not eating a lot of animal-based products. And we had really exciting results. But what I want to underline really, really is that we have faced one huge bottleneck, is that we have a lot of interesting things in the lab, but after when you want to people are asking me, give us the strain, we can use it at school or everywhere, but we don't have the strains because there are no factories producing strains in many countries in Africa. And this is a huge bottleneck we need to solve, to move forward.
Indeed, taking it out of the lab and bringing it to markets. And it's so exciting to hear that there's a lot of developments around functional strains. So hopefully more on that front. So thank you, Christelle, for this. And I'm now turning to you, Lynette. Lynette, you have a long track record in nutrition and in program evaluation, and always with a focus on using evidence to improve policy and program design. And so my question for you, Lynette, is, we know, and we're seeing it again today throughout this webinar, we know that fermented foods are already widely used and that they are valued in many communities. But at the same time, they're still almost invisible in most national policies and in global discussion. So I wonder, within your position at FAO and your work, where it's all about improving access to and the consumption of healthy diets for everyone, where do you see opportunities related to fermented foods to help achieve these aims?
Thanks very much. And thanks for the invitation to be here. Let me just start by one of the important messages I want to come across is that nuancing in our messaging is really important. Not all fortified, not all fermented foods are the same. Many have an important opportunity to increase digestibility, micronutrient bioavailability, and so forth, as we've been hearing. But they also may be formulated in ways that have excessive sodium and other ingredients. So in terms of messaging, we should be talking about nutritious, healthy, safe fermented foods. So just really clear and concise in that side of things. And a lot of the work that we do, such as the joint statement last year with WHO on healthy diets and the principles of a healthy diet, help us have that commonality of messaging related to those important concepts. We've also heard a lot about how fermented foods are parts of healthy diet. There are some examples. FAO does a lot of work supporting countries in the development of food-based dietary guidelines, and the team highlighted to me that several countries already do include fermented foods. Zambia, Sri Lanka, India, to name a few. Most guidelines are developed around food groups. So fermented foods aren't going to be food group. But in that other messaging and that other narrative around how foods are prepared that are a part of those guidelines, there's an important opportunity there to ground those principles of a healthy diet into context and talk about the specificity of the foods. And this year, we will be releasing a new guidance document early next year on the development of food-based dietary guidelines. And there's an important opportunity there to build that out and bring in those context-appropriate foods. There's also a lot of opportunities at FAO. We work very closely with Indigenous peoples. We have an Indigenous peoples unit here who have done a lot of work to preserve Indigenous knowledge and food-related traditions. And of course, fermented foods are a critical part of that work. We also play an active role in consolidating evidence and developing guidelines. And you saw some of the examples there around food safety. But early next year, we'll also have a report coming out on the current state of evidence related to what we're calling animal source food alternatives across nutrition, health, environment, food safety, livelihoods, and other outcomes. And obviously, the fermented foods that are designed with the purpose of replacing animal source foods are embedded within that review. And there'll be a lot of exciting results coming out very soon on that. And then maybe just to wrap up, all of what we do is grounded in data and evidence. We consolidate information around the composition of foods and dietary intake globally. And there's enormous gaps in that regard, both in terms of food composition of fermented foods, so that we can really understand what the nutrient composition of those foods are in the different ways that they are produced, and also the extent to which and how they are consumed as a part of diets. So a bit of a call there to make sure that we continue to generate new data related to the composition of these foods and related to their patterns in consumption so that we can promote those and bring out the opportunities for their consumption as part of a healthy diet. Thanks.
Thank you, Annette. This is so important. I really like the reminder that we need a nuanced messaging on nutritious, healthy, and safe. And I think we just got our first call to action, a very practical call on better dietary intake data and food composition data to support this work. So thank you for this. And I'd now like to bring in the funder perspective, and I will turn to you, Sarah. So Sarah, you have a lot of experience working with governments and partners across programs, policy, and practice to test and scale up evidence. So exactly what Christelle was saying, we don't have enough of. And in fact, you have been championing fermentation from the very beginning. And CIFF is one of the few major philanthropies already investing in fermentation. So would you mind sharing with us, Sarah, what convinced you that fermentation was important enough to bring into CIFF's nutrition portfolio?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kessa. Yeah, I mean, for CIFF, fermentation really emerged as a major missed opportunity because in many of the countries where CIFF is working and across our nutrition, health, and climate portfolios, up to 80% or even 90% of people are already consuming fermented foods every day. Yet very few funders were looking at these foods as strategic levers for improving diet quality, food safety, and resilience. So I think what stood out to us first was the very high reach potential, given so many people are already consuming these foods, combined with the fact that they're deeply rooted in local cultures and traditions. So we're not inventing a new solution. We're looking at how we can kind of strengthen and improve something millions of people already trust and eat, which makes that pathway to impact more sustainable. And then the second factor was the science. We now have strong evidence to show that fermentation can increase the availability of nutrients, reduce anti-nutrients, improve digestibility, and extend shelf life, all without high energy inputs or expensive technology. So it's a solution that's both culturally embedded and strongly backed by the science. And then the other factor is resilience. We know that there's no one single solution to address malnutrition, and we have to look at a very wide range of solutions and innovations. And communities need that, wide basket of safe, nutritious, climate resilient foods that they can rely on when climate shocks, price spikes, or supply chain disruptions hit. So fermentation can expand that basket in a way that's low cost, scalable, and less dependent on external markets, which is exactly the type of resiliency-focused approach that CIFF aims to support. So for CIFF, investing in fermentation wasn't about looking at something niche. It was really recognizing we have this powerful, underused solution that's locally driven, has a huge reach potential, and of course is backed by the science. And so that's why our first step was supporting the special report with Site and Life to pull that evidence together, highlight the gaps, and help governments, partners, and other donors, CIFF included, to see where investment can drive impact and scale. Thanks.
I love it, Sarah. Such a powerful message. I think you're right about diversification. There is no resilience, as you said, without diversification. And I love how you said that fermentation is another tool, basically, in our toolbox to strengthen food systems and to build that resilience. So thanks so much for that. And also that it's not a niche topic, which is, I hope, what we've also shared throughout this webinar. And finally, Francis, I'm turning to you. So you've been leading work on malnutrition and food systems in Nigeria. And the Aliko Dangote Foundation has been one of the front runner on this agenda, including hosting the recent convening on fermentation and this special report in Nigeria. So tell us, Francis, what gave you the confidence that stepping into fermentation was the right move for the foundation? And maybe, what would you hope other countries and donors to take away from Nigeria's leadership on this topic?
Yeah, thank you so much and for that beautiful question. And thanks for all the presenters. I think kind of doing this stems from leveraging the indigenous food products or practices per se to combat malnutrition and food insecurity, which perfectly aligns with the vision of the foundation, which is an Africa whose people are healthier, better educated, and empowered. It's like it's shifting towards African helping Africans, and sometimes even Africans helping the world with what they have. And fermented foods that have gone with history, our heritage, we believe is one of those things we can actually project outside the world and then bringing the world to us in terms of what we can really benefit from. So that's what really prompted taking charge of that and begin to promote fermentation and fermented food products that we have around. And then more so to actually see what we have been doing in the area of food fortification. We're just leveraging the voice of our leaders and their leadership to galvanize support for food fortification, for other nutrition programming. And then we see this too as an opportunity to do that. And then we are hoping that the whole world will begin to see the power of integrating traditional practices with modern science to solve contemporary challenges that we are faced with. More so, we need to innovate and enhance the nutritional kind of profile and the safety of fermented foods that we have. I know many people have raised concern about the safety and the rest, but when we integrate modern science into that historical antecedents, then it will get us a lot of beautiful things. And then you can really see that from the studies that have been shown by different presenters from here, especially the issue of Gary, that is for the whole West Africa. And then how do we promote this to actually bring about addressing food insecurity, hunger, and malnutrition that's actually ravaging communities in Africa? How do we use that? And I think we look at this ahead of us and said, wow, we need to do a lot of this, especially with the evidence that we have seen that if you ferment cassava, the duration of the fermentation will bring about a lot of changes to the organoleptic, mineral availability, and even a lot of other things. that are embedded within the food. And when you combine it with other meal, like have been demonstrated, will give us a lot of sense of that. So in the nutshell, we really want to see how we can create a more kind of alternative strategies to actually combat micronutrient deficiency and malnutrition as a whole in the longer run. Thank you so much. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. I think you've made a really strong case from starting from indigenous foods, but also combining the modern science, as you said, and the local expertise, without losing the cultural meaning and the taste and so on. So thank you for that. I will now open the floor to the audience. So thank you again for staying with us. We have a couple of questions that are coming in, and I will start perhaps with Christelle. There's one question here. Do you think that there is appetite for strains at consumer level, or would it be a B2B market?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the appetite from the people, because many people, they don't really know that they are eating fermented food, and there are some strains inside and some bacteria and some yeast and some molds. But considering what happens for the bread, for example, everybody everywhere in the world knows that you need to buy the yeast to prepare some bread. So I don't see why there would be a problem to buy other starters for other type of food. It's the same for yogurts. Everybody's used to either to buy the yogurt, either to buy the strain. And I think it should be something that could work. But maybe we should work more with social scientists, because we are staying in our lab maybe too often, and maybe we should investigate this part also with other specialists.
Thank you, Christelle. Thank you for that answer. I do want to say to the audience, keep your questions coming. Just pop them in the Q&A box. We have about, I think, maybe 5 questions for 5 minutes for more questions. So please go ahead. Lynette, I think there's one question directed to you. There are a number of fermented foods that are very high in sodium, especially the ones that are in commercial markets and are imported. And usually fermented foods do not have detailed nutrition labels. What are available government good practices or initiatives in subsidizing and financing the fermented food market? Difficult question, but important one.
Yeah, there's a few aspects to that question. So first of all, agreed, there are many products that are high in sodium, and it is important that we look ultimately. What we're concerned about is the total sodium content in the diet, not. I mean, one individual food is important, but it's the total content in the diet that is most important. So this speaks to the need for that food composition data so that we have a better understanding of what's there. In terms of government and other regulatory frameworks and guidance, I have to confess, so certainly from a global level, we have codex that set standards for a lot of products. And I will confess ignorance as to which, if any, product that we're speaking about today have any guidance coming out of codex. That typically is the side both of safety and of nutritional value and levels of products that we look for in advising country where to look for those types of standards. But I think a lot of these products fall outside of the categories. And I think, having this webinar and raising the importance of these products and the commonality with which they're consumed, frankly, is a great opportunity to try to fill some of those gaps and look for those places where we can get better information and better guidance for countries that are interested to include these more explicitly. Thanks. Skirting around the question a little bit, I have to admit.
I'm going to see, are there any additional questions? I think there are a few very detailed ones. There was one on cost, I believe. Let me see here. Or maybe I will ask a few questions, and they don't necessarily have to be directed to a panelist, but feel free to chime in here. What are the effects of drying steps on these products? What controlled dehydration methods can be used to preserve nutrients like B vitamins? I don't know, maybe Christelle, you have an idea here.
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
What are the effects of drying steps on these products? And what controlled dehydration methods can be used to preserve nutrients like B vitamins?
Yeah. I think this is, like, I would say it's not really the point, because like the idea is to use the pure strains to ferment the food, and the food will be eaten as it is usually eaten. This might be important in case of if you want to innovate and to create new type of food products, because at the end you don't necessarily need the vitamin inside the strain, you just need the strain to grow during fermentation. But vitamin B are quite strong, I would say, to dehydration. They don't like the light. This is the most important problem.
Thanks, Krista. And I think your example on injera was exciting for a lot of participants here. So there's a follow-up question. What would be the cost of microbial strains at well, it might be too technical, but as a percentage of retail price for injera, as an example?
Yeah.
The person is keen to understand whether there would be a business case for food producers to integrate fermentation.
Yeah, I think the cost of the strain shouldn't be high, because you don't need to put a lot of the pure strain. We tried to do some calculation, and I would say the most important problem is to have the strain locally. If you need to import it, like, it's not sustainable anymore. And we're working on it, by the way, to see how we can locally produce strains in the different countries using really low cost material. But whatever happens, the inoculation is so small that it shouldn't be an overload. But for someone who would like to produce some nutritionally improved foods, of course, they could advertise to say this is more targeted for young children or for women. So there can be a business. But
Great. Thank you, Christelle. And I think we have time for one more question, which would fit very nicely to Sarah and Francis. So if each of you could provide an answer, very brief. What are the next steps of your specific organization to move fermentation forward? Will there be funding available for research, policy, and advocacy for government? So maybe Sarah first and then Francis.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the question. I think CIFF came from a starting point of not knowing much on fermentation, which is why we did the first step of really trying to pull together this special report with Sight and Life to really, gain that clarity. And, before then, that evidence on fermentation had been quite scattered across countries and disciplines. So bringing that together has really opened up the knowledge base so that not just funders, but also governments and SMEs can kind of make those decisions based on that data. So I think we're still very much in an exploratory phase, but definitely one of the first steps, which I'm sure the Dangote Foundation have been focusing on as well, is really trying to understand what foods are consumed in countries and doing a wide mapping of that so that we can kind of inform what to do next and really understand the regulatory gaps as well. Over.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to add that the roundtable discussions we have had with various stakeholders, now we're moving forward with a kind of a roadmap for the whole country to have different stakeholders, partners, private sector, all that will be involved with the roadmap, with their responsibilities. And it is there and then that we can begin to assign responsibilities for various stakeholders and then moving forward the agenda. However, we have some short-term kind of actions promoting the consumption, production and consumption, because we have to start from where they are, not reinventing the wheel. But we want everybody to be aware of that. Just like what Christelle said, many people are consuming some products and don't know that they are fermented. So all these little kind of messages push out there, then at the same time, getting private sector to be interested. We really want to see that, especially small to medium enterprises, to see how they can really contribute, and then using it as well too for a kind of community empowerment strategies that many development partners will have in place in such a way that you can actually empower the women folks, because majority of them are into fermentation kind of activities. So these are things we have mapped out for ourselves before we start talking of funding. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Francis. And I will end this with one final question, which is directed to you, Francis. Someone's asking, fermented food is an informal sector in the African business model. How can this be developed into a more streamed $1 million model. So $1 million question for the end of this panel session.
Thank you. Simple thing. We just have to have a kind of value chain development of each of those products we are referring to, where those small to medium scale can fit in, then but moving up into, because we are trying to see how this can be industrialized, not just keeping it at that low ebb alone. And that's why I raised the issue of integrating modern science, optimization of the process in such a way that those can feed in with their products becoming raw materials for the bigger industry. And then from there, and I think that's how kind of our business model looks like in Africa. So it's the same way we're looking at fermentation and all the activities along the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. And thank you to everyone for all your excellent questions and answers. The good news is that all unanswered questions will be collected and answered in writing, and we will share those with all participants along with the webinar recording. So don't worry about that. And so I will like to hand over to Dr. Myro Mandara, Africa Advisor at Silent Life, who will share some information on this special report and provide our closing remarks. So over to you, Myro.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The full pleasure. Every time one hears experts speaking about fermentation, one realizes the special gifts we have within our traditional institutions and traditional cultures. Fermentation presents an opportunity which was recognized by Cycle Life and Children's Investment Fund Foundation, resulting in the development of a special report on fermentation. The report brings together research, case studies, and policy recommendations from across Africa and beyond that demonstrates how fermentation can become a key driver of improved diet, food resilience, and sustainable livelihood, especially in this period of economic crisis and downward trend in malnutrition. One of the key findings may seem intuitive, that local traditional practices hold the key to solving the global problems of malnutrition. If only we take time to invest, understand, respect, and integrate these traditional practices, of course, scaling up. The report is split into 4 sections. The first section deals with the scientific evidence, the second with the practical solutions, of course, anchored on field experiences and the way forward in terms of what needs to be done. Not only does this structure demonstrate the need for research and the acknowledgement of existing solutions, it also reflects our beliefs that these efforts must not stop at publication, but should be the starting point for information, practical information that we can all use in our different areas. As we close, ladies and gentlemen, it's important that we remain anchored because we've seen strong evidence of the health benefits of fermented foods. Yes, more research needs to be done, but the science is already very, very, very clear, and we can act now. We don't need to wait. Fermentation boosts nutrition, nutrient availability, supports micronutrient resilience under climate pressure, and is both nutrition smart and climate smart. What makes fermentation special powerful is that it builds on indigenous practices. It does not bring in something new. These practices have been trusted for decades. Today's examples from our experts showed that innovation can grow from heritage through microbial biofortification, improved starter cultures, and strengthening local production. This is a big win for low middle-income countries. Middle-income countries can now lead the world in finding solutions to nutrition. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, let's invest in fermentation, advancing the science, unlocking the knowledge,
building capacity, and flushing forward what needs to be done. I thank you for everything that you have done, and let's keep connected. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.